beefy flavor. Now, there are still a few things from colonial America that have really stood the test of time. Take me, for example. But some of the things are best left in the past. How about bed bugs, the Stamp Act, Old King George, and maybe chicken and dumplings? Why is that? Well, a few hundred years ago, they started with an old bird with lots of flavor, and they stewed it for hours and hours. Great broth, great chicken. Today, guess what? You have liquid that's like dishwater, the chicken's overcooked, and for the dumplings, hey, they're sinkers. So let's go into the test kitchen with Bridget and start with an everyday supermarket chicken and bring back a great recipe from the past, chicken and dumplings. Now, even back in Fannie Farmer's time, and this is the 1911 edition of the Boston Cooking School Cookbook, they actually had two kinds of chickens. They had very young chickens, and she writes, under Poultry and Game, chickens which appear in market during January weighing about 1 1/2 pounds are called spring chickens. So those would be broiled or maybe roasted. But most people, especially earlier than that, pre-Civil War, were using laying hens. They were 3 or 4 years old. No good for eggs anymore, but you put them in a stew pot. Now, what about those chickens? This is very similar to a bird you might have had 150 years ago, or if you raise chickens like we do, a bird that's 3 or 4 years old and goes into the stew pot. It's older, it's larger, it's 4 or 5 pounds or bigger, in addition to which it has a lot of connective tissue, and that's something that you might find in a pork butt or a chuck in beef. In a chicken, the wings have a lot of connective tissue or collagen. It connects the muscles to each other and also muscles to the bones. So wings have quite a lot of that connective tissue. The thighs also, since there's a lot of activity in the legs, also have that as well. The one place, especially in a young chicken, we have very little of it, is in the breast meat. Think of breast meat as having protein strands, muscle strands like straws with liquid in them. And as they cook, those straws contract and they squeeze out liquid. So unless you have a very old chicken and you want to stew it to make, let's say, chicken and dumplings, which we're about to do, you got to think about what you're doing because you really can't cook it that long. So first of all is don't use the breast meat. And secondly, collagen, which is in the wings and thighs, is really a good thing and stands up to low, slow cooking. So let's bring in Bridget, now that I've given you my science and history of the bird.
I'll say. All right, we're going to get started cooking our great chicken and dumplings. But before we get to the chicken, I have 2 teaspoons of vegetable oil. If you could turn that to medium-high heat, we're going to heat this until it just starts to shimmer. For the chicken, we're using thighs here. And this is about 2 1/2 pounds of chicken thighs, or 6 thighs here. And I want to pat them dry with paper towels. We don't want any moisture on the surface to really impede in the browning. I'm going to season it with some salt and pepper. I've got a teaspoon of salt, half on that side, half on this side. And the same thing with pepper. I have a 1/4 teaspoon of pepper here. All right, both sides. And I believe the oil is shimmering. We're going to add the chicken thighs skin side down right into that hot pan, getting a really good sear. Now the chicken skin is on there. It's going to protect that meaty side. It's also going to render and start to form a really flavorful brown bits all over the bottom of the pan. So I'm going to brown this on the first side until it's golden brown. That's going to take about 5 to 7 minutes. Then I'm going to flip it and do the same thing to the second side. After the chicken thighs have been browned on both sides, I'm going to transfer them to a plate. And then I'm going to remove all but 1 teaspoon of that fat. Now that beautiful fat I'm going to use to saute all my vegetables in. We've got 2 onions that are finely chopped, 1 celery rib also finely chopped, and then 2 carrots which we peeled and cut into larger 3/4 inch pieces. And we're going to get those all good and caramelized, and that's going to take about 7 to 9 minutes. So now we want to pull up all those brown bits and bring it into the broth, and we're going to do that by deglazing the pan. I'm using dry sherry here, 1/4 cup, and that's a pretty traditional flavor for chicken and dumplings. That looks great. Smells great, too. So now I'm going to add some low-sodium chicken broth, 6 cups. This is a teaspoon of minced fresh thyme, and I'll return that chicken right back into the pot. So on their own, they would give great flavor to that broth, but, you know, they really aren't going to bring enough of that body that you were talking about from the collagen. So we're using chicken wings. This is 1 pound of chicken wings. And I'm going to cover it and simmer it. So we're going to cook this until the thighs are very, very tender. Now that's going to take about 45 to 55 minutes. And I'll know it's tender because I'm going to pull one out and check it. I'm going to poke it with a knife and see if it meets any resistance. It should meet very little resistance, but it should still cling to the bones. So it's been 5 minutes, and we've let the chicken cool down a little bit. We've also let this broth cool down for about 5 minutes, and it's settled. So there's all this fat on top, and I need you to skim that and get rid of it.
All right. Well.
So what I'm doing is I'm just removing the skin, pulling the meat right off. You can see how tender it is. And then I'm going to chop it into 1-inch pieces. So I'm going to return all this meat back to the pot, and if you could turn it up, we want to bring that back up to a simmer, and that gives us some time to make our dumplings. We're going to mix 2 cups, or about 10 ounces, of all-purpose flour. To season, I'm going to add a teaspoon of sugar and a teaspoon of salt, and just a half a teaspoon of baking soda. That's the only leavener we're going to use here. Just want to whisk this together. And we're using buttermilk. This is 3/4 cup of very cold buttermilk. Now we're using buttermilk because it's an acid, and it's going to react with the baking soda and give us our lift. This is 4 tablespoons of unsalted butter that we've melted and let cool for just a couple of minutes. I'm going to stir these together, and that cold buttermilk is going to make the butter start to clump. See? These little clumps of butter, once they're in the dough, they're going to melt in the dumplings and form little bursts of steam that are going to help the dumplings rise. All right, so now we're going to add 1 egg white, and we just want the egg white, not the whole egg, because we don't like the eggy flavor, but we like the structure that it lends. Wet ingredients meet dry ingredients, and if you can make sure that is up to a boil. So I'm just going to stir this until this dumpling dough starts to pull away from the sides of the bowl. That looks great. So before we add our dumplings, I want to finish with a little bit of seasoning here. I've got a 1/4 cup of fresh minced parsley. I'm going to add a little bit more salt. So now we're going to add our dumplings. Now you want it to be at a full boil because the dumpling dough is going to set as soon as it hits that and really start to rise. But as you can see here, we've made some where this broth was not up to a full boil. What happens is that the dumplings, they kind of slump and they disintegrate. So make sure it's at a boil. Now, to scoop this in there, you can go out and get yourself a number 60 ice cream scoop, which I highly recommend. Just scooping slightly rounded scoops right into that mixture. Now, depending on how you scoop, this should make roughly 24 little dumplings. Now, most recipes would just simply put the cover on, but the problem with that is all that steam is going to collect on the bottom.
Down.
That's right, collect on the bottom side of the lid. It's almost like an irrigation system. You don't want that. So, take a towel and put my lid right on the towel. And put that right on there. And that's going to absorb any liquid. Now you want to make sure that the towel stays on top and doesn't fall over the sides.
You pour your house down.
That's right, you'll have an inferno.
So this is a chicken and dumpling cozy.
That's right.
Is that what it is?
That's very good.
It's very cute.
All right, so we're going to cook these until they're cooked all the way through. That's going to take about 13 to 16 minutes. I'm going to test a couple of them with a toothpick and make sure that it goes in and out and comes out clean. So it's been about 13 minutes. Let's take a look. All right. There you go.
All right.
Oh, look at that. Now that looks beautiful. And you can see how rich that broth is.
That is really good. So this is definitely the best chicken and dumplings I've ever had. And the secret was starting with the right chicken parts, which was thighs and wings, a lot of collagen, a lot of flavor. And then we finished with a drop biscuit recipe, not a baking powder biscuit, onto a simmering liquid. So they set up nicely
Sure.
flat. So there you have it, a great recipe for chicken and dumplings. And for all of the recipes from today, the tastings and testings, you can also see selected shows from this season. Go to americastestkitchen.com and get everything right there.
I might do that.
You might do that. But first, we're going to finish a great recipe for chicken and dumplings.